There is perhaps no more obvious vanity than to write of it so vainly. What the divinity has so divinely told us about it. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Who does not see that I have taken a road along which I shall go without stopping and without effort, as long as there is ink and paper in the world? I cannot keep a record of my life by my actions. Fortune places them too low. I keep it by my thoughts. Thus I knew a gentleman who gave knowledge of his life only by the workings of his belly. You would see on display at his home a row of chamber pots 7 or 8 days' worth. That was his study. His conversation, all other talk, stank in his nostrils. Here you have, a little more decently, some excrements of an aged mind, now hard, now loose, and always undigested. And when shall I make an end of describing the continual agitation and changes of my thoughts, whatever subject they light on, since Diomedes filled 6,000 books with the sole subject of grammar? What must prattle produce, when the stammering and loosening of the tongue smothered the world with such horrible load of volumes? So many words for the sake of words alone? O Pythagoras, why did you not conjure away this tempest? One Galba was blamed in the past for living idly. He replied that each man should give account of his actions, not of his leisure. He was wrong, for justice has cognizance and corrective power also over those who are on a holiday. But there should be some legal restraint aimed against inept and useless writers, as there is against vagabonds and idlers. Both I and 100 others would be banished from the hands of our people. This is no jest. Scribbling seems to be a sort of symptom of an unruly age. When did we write so much as since our dissensions began? When did the Romans write so much as in the time of their downfall? Besides the fact that mental refinement does not mean wiser conduct in a society, this idle occupation arises from the fact that everyone goes about the duties of his office laxly and takes time off. The corruption of the age is produced by the individual contribution of each one of us. Some contribute treachery, others injustice, irreligion, tyranny, avarice, cruelty, in accordance with their greater power. The weaker ones bring stupidity, vanity, idleness, and I am one of them. It seems to be the season for empty things, when harmful ones weigh upon us. In a time when it is so common to do evil, it is practically praiseworthy to do what is merely useless. I console myself by thinking that I shall be one of the last on whom they will have to lay hands. While they are attending to the more urgent cases, I shall have leisure to reform. For it seems to me that it would be contrary to reason to prosecute petty offenses when we are infested with great ones. And the physician Philotimus said to a man who gave him his finger to dress, and from whose complexion and breath he recognized an ulcer of the lungs, "My friend, this is not the moment to waste time on your fingernails." However, in this connection, I saw some years ago that an important person whose memory I hold in unusual esteem in the midst of our great disorders, when there was neither law nor justice nor any magistrate doing his duty, any more than now, publicly suggested some puny reforms or other in dress, cookery, and legal procedure. These are amusements with which they feed a maltreated people, to tell them that they have not been completely forgotten. Those others do likewise who confine themselves to insistently prohibiting certain ways of speaking and dancing and games to a people ruined by all sorts of execrable vices. It is no time to wash and clean up when we are seized with a violent fever. It is for the Spartans alone to start combing and arranging their hair when they are on the point of flinging themselves into some extreme danger to their lives. As for me, I have this other worse habit, that if I have one shoe on wrong, I also leave my shirt and my cloak on wrong. I scorn to reform halfway. When I am in a bad way, I grow bent on misfortune. I abandon myself in despair, and let myself slip toward the precipice, and, as they say, throw the handle after the axe. I persist in growing worse, and think myself no longer worth my care, either entirely well or entirely ill. It is a favor for me that the desolation of this state coincides with the desolation of my age. I suffer the times to increase my ills more willingly than I would have suffered them to disturb my well-being. The words I utter in misfortune are words of anger. My courage bristles up instead of lying down, and in contrast to others, I find myself more devout in good fortune than in bad, following the precept of Xenophon, if not his reason for it, and I am more apt to turn loving eyes to heaven in thanks than in request. I take more pains to improve my health when it smiles on me than I do to get it back when I have parted from it. Prosperity is discipline and education to me, as are adversaries and rods to others. As if good fortune were incompatible with a good conscience, men never become good except in bad fortune. Good fortune to me is a singular spur to moderation and modesty. Prayer wins me, threats repel me, favor makes me bend, fear makes me stiffen. Among human characteristics, this one is rather common, to be better pleased with other people's things than with our own, and to love movement and change. We only heed the daylight's pleasant course because each hour proceeds on a fresh horse. Patronus. I have my share of that. Those who go to the other extreme of taking delight in themselves, of valuing what they have above other things, and recognizing nothing as more beautiful than what they see, if they are not wiser than we, are in truth happier. I do not envy their wisdom, but I do their good fortune. This greedy appetite for new and unknown things indeed helps to foster in me the desire to travel, but enough other circumstances contribute to it. I gladly turn aside from governing my house. There is a certain satisfaction in being in command, were it only of a barn, and in being obeyed by one's people, but it is too monotonous and languid a pleasure, and then it is necessarily mingled with many burdensome thoughts. Now the poverty and oppression of your tenants afflicts you, now a quarrel between your neighbors, now their encroachments upon you. It may be vineyards beaten down with hail, deceitful soil that makes the harvest fail, or trees that blame the rains, the skies that grill the fields, or winter's devastating chill, of course. And the fact that hardly once in 6 months will God send a spell of weather with which your steward is fully satisfied, and which, if it is good for the vines, does not harm the meadows. The sun burns down with too extreme a heat, or sudden rains and icy frost lay low, and windstorms harass as they whirl and blow. Capricious. Add to that the new and well-shaped shoe of the man of days gone by, which hurts your foot, and the fact that a stranger does not understand how much it costs you and how much you sacrifice to keep up that appearance of order which people see in your family, and that perhaps you buy it too dear. I was late in taking up the management of a household. Those whom nature had sent into the world before me relieved me of that burden for a long time. I had already contracted a different bent, more suitable to my disposition. At all events, from what I have seen of it, it is an occupation more bothersome than difficult. Whoever is capable of anything else will very easily be capable of this. If I sought to get rich this way would seem too long to me. I would have served kings a more productive traffic than any other, since the only thing I aspire to acquire is the reputation of having acquired nothing, just as I have squandered nothing, in conformity with the rest of my life, unsuited for doing good or doing evil. And since I seek only to pass by, I can do that, thank God, without much attention. If worse comes to worse, meet poverty halfway by retrenching expenses. That is what I am striving to do, that and to reform before poverty forces me to. Furthermore, I have established enough levels in my soul where I can get along with less than I have. Get along contentedly, not by the calculation of your income, but by your manner of living and your culture. Is your worth really to be reckoned? Cicero. My real need does not so wholly take up all I have that fortune does not have something of mine to bite on without biting into the flesh. My presence, ignorant and uninterested as I am, is very helpful in my domestic affairs. I take part in them but grudgingly. Besides, there is this about my household, that while I burn the candle privately at my end, the other end is not spared in the least. Traveling hurts me only by its expense, which is great and beyond my means. Being accustomed to travel not only with the necessary retinue, but with a decent one, I have to make my trips that much shorter and less frequent, and I use on them only skimmings and reserves, temporizing and postponing until these come to hand. I will not have the pleasure of wandering spoil the pleasure of my repose. On the contrary, I intend that they shall feed and favor each other. Fortune has helped me in this, that since my principal profession in this life was to live it comfortably, and rather relaxedly than busily, it rid me of the need to multiply my riches to provide for a multitude of heirs. As for the one I have, if she does not have enough with what has been so plentifully enough for me, too bad for her. If she is improvident, she will not deserve that I should wish her any more. And each man, according to the example of Phocion, provides adequately for his children who provides for them in so far as they are not unlike himself. I certainly should not concur with the action of Crates, who left his money with the banker, with this condition, that if his children were fools he should give it to them, if they were clever he should distribute it to the most simple-minded of the people, as if fools, for being less capable of doing without riches, were more capable of using them. At all events, the damage resulting from my absence does not seem to warrant, as long as I can afford it, my refusing to accept the chances that come up to gain diversion from the vexation of being present. There is always something that goes wrong. The affairs now of one house, now of another, pester you. You pry into everything too closely. Perspicacity hurts you here, as indeed it does often enough elsewhere. I avoid occasions for vexation, and turn away from the knowledge of things that are going badly, and yet I cannot contrive well enough not to be constantly bumping into something at home that I do not like. And the knaveries that they most hide from me are the ones I know best. There are some that we must ourselves help to conceal, so that they will hurt less. Trivial pinpricks, sometimes trivial, but always pinpricks. The pettiest and slightest nuisances are the most acute, and as small letters hurt and tire the eyes most, so do small matters sting us most. The throng of petty troubles pains us more than the violence of a single one, however great it may be. The more crowded and sharp these domestic thorns are, the more sharply and without warning they prick us, easily catching us unawares. I am no philosopher. Evils crush me according to their weight, and the weight depends on their form as much as on their matter, and often more. I have more experience of them than the common people, so I have more patience. In short, if they do not wound me, they hurt me. Life is a tender thing and easy to disturb, from the moment I am inclined to a bad humor, for no one resists after yielding to the first impulse. However stupid the cause that so impelled me, I irritate my humor in that direction, and it then feeds and exasperates itself by its own movement, attracting and accumulating matter upon matter to feed on. Small drops of water hollow out a stone. These regular drippings wear me down. Regular annoyances are never slight. They are continual and irreparable, especially when they arise from details of household management, which are continual and unavoidable. When I consider my affairs from a distance and as a whole, I find, possibly because my memory of them is scarcely exact, that they have gotten along until now, and prosper beyond my expectations and calculations. It seems to me that I get more out of them than is in them. Their success fools me, but when I am in the midst of the job and see all these parts in operation, then is our soul distraught with countless cares. A thousand things give me reason to desire and fear. To give them up completely is very easy for me. To become involved in them without worrying, very difficult. It is pitiful to be in a place where everything you see involves and concerns you, and I seem to enjoy more gaily the pleasures of someone else's house, and to approach them with a purer relish. Diogenes answered in my vein the man who asked him what sort of wine he liked best. Other people's, he said. My father loved to build up Montaigne, where he was born, and in all this administration of domestic affairs, I love to follow his example and his rules, and shall bind my successors to them as much as I can. If I could do better for him, I would. I glory in the fact that his will still operates and acts through me. God forbid that I should allow to fail in my hands any semblance of life that I could restore to so good a father. Whenever I have taken a hand in completing some old bit of wall and repairing some badly constructed building, it has certainly been out of regard more to his intentions than to my own satisfaction, and I blame my indolence that I have not gone further toward completing the things he began so handsomely in his house, all the more because I have a good chance of being the last of my race to possess it, and the last to put a hand to it. For as regards my own personal inclination, neither the pleasure of building, which is said to be so alluring, nor hunting, nor gardens, nor the other pleasures of a retired life can amuse me very much. That is a thing for which I am annoyed with myself, as I am for all other notions that are a nuisance to me. I do not care so much that ideas be vigorous and learned, as I care that they be easy and suitable for life. They are true and sound enough if they are useful and pleasing. Those people are the death of me who, hearing me declare my incompetence in household occupations, go and whisper in my ears that it is disdain, and that I neglect to learn the implements of farming, its seasons, its order, how my wines are made, how grafting is done, the names and shapes of herbs and fruits, the way to prepare the food I live on, and the names and prices of the materials I wear, because my heart is set on some higher knowledge. That kind of thing is foolishness, and rather stupidity than vanity. I would rather be a good horseman than a good logician. Why not make something that will meet a need by plaiting wicker in the pliant reed? We entangle our thoughts in generalities, and the causes and conduct of the universe which conduct themselves very well without us, and we leave behind our own affairs and Michel, who concerns us even more closely than man in general. Now, I do indeed stay at home most of the time, but I should like to enjoy myself there more than elsewhere. For my old age, a haven may be an end of weary trips by land and sea and soldiery. Horace. I don't know whether I shall accomplish this. I wish that instead of some other part of his estate, my father had handed down to me that passionate love that he had in his old age for his household. He was very happy in being able to keep his desires down to his means, and to be pleased with what he had. Political philosophy may condemn, for all I care, the meanness and sterility of my occupation, if I can once acquire a taste for it as he did. I am of the opinion that the most honorable occupation is to serve the public and to be useful to many. The fruits of genius, virtue, and all excellence are most rewarding when they benefit some neighbor. Cicero. For my part, I stay out of it, partly out of conscience, for in the same way that I see the weight attached to such employments, I see also what little qualification I have for them. And Plato, a master workman in all political government, nevertheless abstained from it, partly out of laziness. I am content to enjoy the world without being all wrapped up in it, to live a merely excusable life, which will merely be no burden to myself or others. Never did a man abandon himself more fully and relaxedly to the care and rule of a stranger than I would if I had someone. One of my wishes at this moment would be to find a son-in-law who could spoon-feed my old age comfortably and put it to sleep, in whose hands I could deposit full sovereignty over the management and use of my possessions, that he might do with them as I do, and enjoy my present profits in my place, provided he brought to it a truly grateful and friendly heart. But then, we live in a world where loyalty in our children is unknown. Whoever has charge of my purse and my travels has it absolutely and without having to render an account. He could cheat me just as well if I kept accounts, and unless he is a devil, I oblige him to be honest by such abandoned trust. Many, by their fear of being cheated, have taught how to cheat, and by their suspicions have justified other men in doing wrong. Seneca. The commonest security I take from my people is ignorance. I assume the existence of vices only after having seen them, and I trust the younger ones farther, whom I regard as less corrupted by bad examples. I would rather be told at the end of 2 months that I have spent 400 crowns than have my ears drummed every evening with 3, 5, 7. Yet I have been robbed as little as the next man by this sort of larceny. It is true that I lend a hand to my ignorance. I purposely keep my knowledge of my money somewhat hazy and uncertain. Up to a certain point, I am glad to be able to be in doubt about it. You have to leave a little room for the dishonesty or improvidence of your servant. If we have enough left altogether to play our part, let that surplus of fortune's liberality run a little more at her mercy. The gleaner's share. After all, I do not prize the fidelity of my people as much as I despise the damage they do me. Oh, what a vile and stupid study it is to study one's money, take pleasure in handling it, weighing it, and counting it over and over. That is the way avarice makes its approach. In the 18 years that I have been managing an estate, I have not succeeded in prevailing upon myself really to study a title deed of my principal affairs, which necessarily have to pass within my knowledge and attention. This is not a philosophical scorn for transitory and mundane things. My taste is not so refined, and I value them at least at their worth, but it certainly is inexcusable in childish laziness and negligence. What would I not do rather than read a contract, rather than go and disturb those dusty masses of papers, a slave to my affairs, or still worse, to those of others, as so many people are for the sake of money? Nothing costs me dear except care and trouble, and I seek only to grow indifferent and relaxed. I was, I think, better fitted to live on another man's fortune, if that could be done without obligation and servitude, and that I do not know. When I look at it closely, whether, given my disposition and my lot, there is not more abjection, trouble, and bitterness in what I have to endure from business and servants and household than there would be in serving a man born greater than myself, who would leave me in some sort of comfort. Servitude is the obedience of a broken and abject mind, lacking free will. Cicero. Crates did worse when he cast himself into the freedom of poverty to get rid of the indignities and cares of a household. That I would not do. I hate poverty as much as pain, but I certainly would change this sort of life for another less brilliant and less busy. Absent from home, I strip off all such thoughts, and I should then feel less the ruin of a tower than I feel when present the fall of a tile. My soul easily achieves detachment from a distance, but on the spot it suffers like a wine grower's. A rein fixed badly on my horse, a stirrup leather slapping against my leg, will keep me in a bad humor a whole day. I raise my courage enough to meet annoyances, my eyes I cannot. The senses, ye gods, the senses! At home I am responsible for all that goes wrong. Few masters, I am speaking of those of medium condition like me, and if there are any, they are more fortunate, can rely so much on another that a good part of the load does not remain on their shoulders. That tends to make me less gracious in entertaining visitors, and may perhaps have kept one or another of them here more by my kitchen than by my graciousness, as boors do, and takes away much of the pleasure I should derive at home from the visits and gatherings of my friends. A gentleman never looks so stupid in his own house as when we see him caught up in the business of housekeeping, whispering in the ear of one servant, threatening another with his eyes. It should flow imperceptibly and seem like a normal process, and I think it ugly to talk to your guests about the way you are treating them, whether to excuse it or to boast of it. I love order and cleanliness. The plates and glasses reflect my face, Horace, as much as abundance. and in my house I give careful attention to what is needful, little to ostentation. If a footman starts fighting at another man's house, if a dish is tipped over, you only laugh at it. You sleep, while the master arranges with his butler for your next day's entertainment. I speak of these things as I see them, generally not failing to appreciate what a pleasant occupation for certain natures is a peaceful, prosperous household, conducted in determined order, and not wishing to fasten my own errors and shortcomings to the matter, or to give the lie to Plato, who thinks the happiest occupation for each man is to carry on his own affairs without injustice. When I travel, I have only myself and the use of my money to think about. That is disposed of with a single precept. For amassing it, too many qualities are required. About that I know nothing. About spending I know something, and making a show of what I spend, which is really its principal use. But I apply myself to it too ambitiously, which makes it uneven and shapeless, and immoderate besides in both directions. If it makes a show and is useful, I let myself go injudiciously, and I tighten up just as injudiciously if it does not shine and does not please me. Whatever it is, whether art or nature, that imprints in us this disposition to live with reference to others, it does us much more harm than good. We defraud ourselves of our own advantages to make appearances conform with public opinion. We do not care so much what we are in ourselves and in reality as what we are in the public mind. Even the joys of the mind and wisdom appear fruitless to us if they are enjoyed by ourselves alone, if they do not shine forth to the sight and approbation of others. There are men whose gold flows in great streams through underground places imperceptibly. Others beat it all out into sheets and leaf, so that for some farthings are worth crowns, for the others the reverse. Since the world judges expense and means according to the show, all anxious care about riches smells of avarice, as does even spending and liberality when it is too systematic and artificial. They are not worth painful watchfulness and care. He who tries to make his spending exact makes it pinched and constrained. Saving and spending are in themselves indifferent things, and take on the color of good or bad only according to the intention we apply to them. The other thing that invites me to these excursions is that the present moral state of our country does not suit me. I could easily console myself for this corruption as regards the public interest. Worse than the Iron Age, times for whose shame nature herself in vain would find a name, or metal symbolizing their ill fame. Juvenal. But with regard to my own, no, I in particular suffer from it too much, for in my neighborhood we have now grown old, through the long license of these civil wars, in so riotous a form of government, where right and wrong are interchanged, Virgil, that in truth it is a marvel that it can subsist. In arms they till the soil, and ever their delight is to amass new loot, and live by lawless might, Virgil. In fine, I see from our example that human society holds and is knit together at any cost whatever. Whatever position you set men in, they pile up and arrange themselves by moving and crowding together, just as ill-matched objects put in a bag without order find of themselves a way to unite and fall into place together, often better than they could have been arranged by art. King Philip collected the most wicked and incorrigible men he could find, and settled them all in a city he had built for them, which bore their name, Paneropolis, which in Greek means city of the wicked. I judge that from their very vices they set up a political system among themselves and a workable and regular society. I see not one action, or 3 or 100, but morals in common and accepted practice, so monstrous, especially in inhumanity and treachery, that I have not the heart to think of them without horror, and I marvel at them almost as much as I detest them. The practice of these errant villainies bears the mark of vigor and strength of soul as much as of error and disorder. Necessity reconciles men and brings them together. This accidental link afterward takes the form of laws, for there have been some as savage as any human opinion can produce, which have nevertheless maintained their bodily health and long life, as well as those of Plato and Aristotle could do. And indeed, all those imaginary artificial descriptions of a government prove ridiculous and unfit to put into practice. These great, lengthy altercations about the best form of society and the rules most suitable to bind us are altercations fit only for the exercise of our minds, as in the liberal arts there are several subjects whose essence is controversy and dispute, and which have no life apart from that. Such a description of a government would be applicable in a new world, but we take men already bound and formed to certain customs. We do not create them, like Pyrrha or Cadmus, but whatever means we may have power to correct and reform them, we can hardly twist them out of their accustomed bent without breaking up everything. Solon was asked whether he had established the best laws he could for the Athenians. Yes, indeed, he answered, the best they would have accepted. Varro excuses himself in the same way, saying that if he had to write about religion as something new, he would say what he thinks of it, but since it is already formed and accepted, he will speak of it more according to custom than according to nature. Not in theory, but in truth, the best and most excellent government for each nation is the one under which it has preserved its existence. Its form and essential fitness depend on habit. We are prone to be discontented with the present state of things, but I maintain nevertheless that to wish for the government of a few in a democratic state or another type of government in a monarchy is foolish and wrong. Love your own state and be it what it will. If it is royal, then love royalty. If oligarchy or democracy, God brought you into it, so love it still. Pinpricks. We do for the Pinpricks, 1529-84, distinguished moderate magistrate and man of letters, was the author of the book of quatrains of which Montaigne quotes. Good Monsieur de Pinpricks, whom we have just lost, such a noble mind, such sound opinions, such a gentle character. This loss and that of Monsieur de Foix, which we suffered at the same time, are important losses to our crown. I do not know if France has another pair left, comparable in sincerity and ability to substitute for these two Gascons in the councils of our kings. They were souls beautiful in different ways, and certainly rare and beautiful by the standards of our times, each in his own way, but who placed them in this age, they who were so out of tune in proportion with our corruption and tempests. Nothing presses a state hard except innovation. Change alone lends shape to injustice and tyranny. When some part is dislocated, we can prop it up. We can fight against letting the altercation and corruption natural to all things carry us too far from our beginnings and principles, but to undertake to recast so great a mass, to change the foundations of so great a structure, that is a job for those who wipe out a picture in order to clean it, who want to reform defects of detail by universal confusion and cure illnesses by death, who desire not so much to change as to overthrow everything. Cicero. The world is ill-fitted to cure itself. It is so impatient of its affliction that it aims only at getting rid of it without considering the cost. We see by 1,000 examples that it usually cures itself to its own disadvantage. Riddance from a present evil is not cure unless there is an all-around improvement in condition. The surgeon's aim is not to kill the diseased flesh. That is only the road to his cure. He looks beyond, to make the natural flesh grow again and restore the part to its proper condition. Whoever proposes merely to remove what is biting him falls short, for good does not necessarily succeed evil. Another evil may succeed it, and a worse one, as happened to Caesar's slayers. who cast the republic into such a state that they had reason to repent of having meddled with it. To many others since, right down to our own time, the same thing has happened. The French, my contemporaries, could tell you a thing or two about it. All great changes shake the state and throw it into disorder. Anyone who would aim straight at a cure and would reflect on it before taking any action would be likely to cool off about setting his hand to it. Pacuvius Calavius corrected the error of this procedure by a signal example. His fellow citizens were in revolt against their magistrates. He, a person of great authority in the city of Capua, one day found means to lock up the Senate in the palace, and calling the people together in the marketplace told them that the day had come when, in full liberty, they could take vengeance on the tyrants who had so long oppressed them, and whom he held alone and disarmed at his mercy. He advised them that these men should be brought out one, by lot, and that they should decide about each one individually, and have their sentence executed on the spot, with this provision also, that at the same time they should decide to appoint some honorable man in the place of the condemned man, so that the office should not remain vacant. They had no sooner heard the name of one senator than there arose a cry of general dissatisfaction against him. I see very well, said Pacuvius, that we must dismiss this one. He is a wicked man. Let us have a good one in exchange. There was a prompt silence, everyone being much at a loss whom to choose. The first man bold enough to name his choice met a still greater unanimity of voices to refuse him, citing 100 imperfections and just causes for rejecting him. These contradictory humors having grown heated, it fared still worse with the second senator, and the third, as much disagreement about election as agreement about dismissal. Having tired themselves out uselessly in this dispute, they began bit by bit, one this way, one that, to steal away from the assembly, each one bearing away this conclusion in his mind, that the oldest and best known evil is always more bearable than evil that is new and untried. Because I see us pitifully agitated, for what have we not done? Alas, by scars and sins our souls are stained, and brother's blood. From what have we refrained in this hard age? What evil have we fled or left undone? When has our youth, in dread of irritated gods, its hand restrained? What altar not profaned? Horace. I do not immediately jump to the conclusion that, though even safety would preserve this family, henceforth she never could. Terence. Perhaps we are not on our last legs for all that. The preservation of states is a thing that probably surpasses our understanding. As Plato says, a civil government is a powerful thing and hard to dissolve. It often holds out against mortal internal diseases, against the mischief of unjust laws, against tyranny, against the excesses and ignorance of the magistrates, and the license and sedition of the people. In all our fortunes, we compare ourselves with what is above us and look toward those who are better off. Let us measure ourselves with what is below. There is no one so ill starred that he may not find 1,000 examples to console him. It is our weakness that we are more unhappy to see people ahead of us than happy to see people behind us. However, Solon used to say that if someone made a pile of all the ills together, there is no one who would not choose rather to take back with him the ills he has than to come to a legitimate division with all other men and take his rightful share. Our government is in bad health, yet some have been sicker without dying. The gods play pelota with us and drive us about in every way. Truly the gods play with us as with balls. Plautus. The stars fatally destine the state of Rome for an example of what they can do in this way. In it are comprised all the forms and vicissitudes that affect the state, all that order can do, and disorder, and good fortune, and misfortune. What state ought to despair of its condition, seeing the shocks and commotions by which Rome was disturbed, and which it withstood? If extent of dominion is the health of a state, which I do not at all believe, and I, like Isocrates, when he instructs Nicles, not to Nicocles, not to envy princes who have broad dominions, but rather those who know how to keep in good condition the ones that have been handed down to them. The Roman state was never so healthy as when it was sickest. The worst of its forms was the most fortunate. One can hardly distinguish the features of any kind of government under the first emperors. It was the thickest and most horrible confusion imaginable. Nevertheless, Rome endured it and continued in it, preserving not a monarchy confined within its own bounds, but all those nations so unlike, so remote, so ill-disposed, ruled with so little order and conquered so unjustly. Fortune gives no right to any nation to indulge her spite against the state that rules over land and sea. Lucan. All that totters does not fall. The fabric of so great a body holds together by more than a single nail. It holds together even by its antiquity, like old buildings whose foundations have been worn away by age, without cement or mortar, which yet live and support themselves by their own weight. The day it clung to healthy roots is past. Its weight now holds it up. Lucan. Furthermore, it is not a good procedure to reconnoiter only the flank and the moat. To judge the security of a place, we must see from what direction it can be approached and what is the condition of the attacker. Few vessels sink of their own weight and without external violence. Now let us turn our eyes in all directions. Everything is crumbling about us. In all the great states that we know, whether in Christendom or elsewhere, take a look, you will find an evident threat of change and ruin. They have their own misfortunes and have all been through the storm. The astrologers have an easy game when they warn us, as they do, of great and imminent altercations and mutations. Their prophecies are present and palpable. You do not need to go to the heavens for that. We may derive not only consolation from this universal company of evils and menaces, but even some hope for the duration of our state, inasmuch as naturally nothing falls where everything falls. Universal sickness is individual health. Conformity is a quality hostile to dissolution. For my part, I do not despair about it, and in it I seem to see ways of saving ourselves. Perhaps a God will yet restore, by happy change, our bliss of yore. Who knows but that God wills it to happen, as with bodies that purge themselves and are restored to better condition by long and grievous maladies, which give them back a clear and more complete health than they took away from them. What most weighs me down is that when I count up the symptoms of our trouble, I see as many that are natural and that heaven sends us from its own stock, as of those that our disorder and human imprudence contribute. It seems as if the very stars have ordained that we have lasted long enough beyond the ordinary term, and this also weighs me down, that the evil that most nearly threatens us is not an alteration in the entire and solid mass, but its dissipation and disintegration, the worst of our fears. Also, in these ramblings of mine, I fear the treachery of my memory, lest inadvertently it may have made me record something twice. I hate to re-examine myself and never reread, if I can help it, what has once escaped me. Now I am bringing in here nothing newly learned. These are common ideas. Having perhaps thought of them 100 times, I am afraid I have already set them down. Repetition is boring anywhere, even in Homer, but it is ruinous in things that attract only superficial and passing attention. I dislike inculcation even of useful things, as in Seneca, and I dislike the practice of his stoical school of repeating, in connection with every subject, in full length and breadth, the principles and premises for general use, and restating ever anew their common and universal arguments and reasons. My memory grows cruelly worse every day, as though with thirsty throat I quaffed some soporific Lethean drought horse. Henceforth, for thank God, up to now, no serious blunder has resulted, whereas others seek time and opportunity to think over what they have to say. I shall have to avoid any preparation for fear of binding myself to some obligation on which I should be dependent. To be held and bound puts me off my track, and likewise to depend on so feeble an instrument as my memory. I never read the following story without indignation. and natural and personal resentment. Lyncestes, accused of conspiracy against Alexander on the day when he was brought before the army, according to custom, to be heard in his own defense, had in his head a studied oration, of which, all hesitating and stammering, he pronounced a few words. As he was growing more and more confused, struggling with his memory and searching it, the soldiers nearest him charged him and killed him with their pikes, considering him convicted. His confusion and his silence was to them as good as a confession. Since he had had so much leisure to prepare himself in prison, it was not, in their opinion, his memory that failed him. It was his conscience that tied his tongue and took away his strength. That certainty was good reasoning. The place, the audience, the anticipation, daze a man even when nothing is at stake but the ambition to speak well. What can a man do when it is a speech on which his life depends? For my part, the very fact of being bound to what I have to say is enough to break my grip on it. When I have committed and entrusted myself entirely to my memory, I lean so heavily on it that I overburden it. It takes fright at its load. As long as I rely on it, I place myself outside myself till I risk losing countenance, and some days I have found myself hard pressed to conceal the slavery in which I was bound, whereas my plan in speaking is to display extreme carelessness and unstudied and unpremeditated gestures, as if they arose from the immediate occasion, for I would as soon say nothing worth while as show I had come prepared to be eloquent, an unbecoming thing, especially for people of my profession, and too binding a thing for a man who cannot live up to much. The preparation gives more hope than it fulfills. Often a man stupidly strips to his doublet only to jump no better than he would in a cloak. There is nothing so unfavorable to those who wish to please as the expectation they arouse. Cicero. It is recorded of the orator Curio that when he stated first the division of his oration into 3 or 4 parts, or the number of his arguments and reasons, it often happened that he either forgot one or added 1 or 2 extra. I have always carefully guarded against falling into this predicament, having always hated these promises and prescriptions, not only out of distrust of my memory, but also because this method owes too much to artificiality. A simpler style becomes a soldier. Quintilian. Enough that I have promised myself henceforth never again to take up the task of speaking on formal occasions, for as for reading one's speech, besides being unnatural, it is a great disadvantage for those who naturally have some power of gesture. And as for throwing myself on the mercy of my improvisation, that is even less desirable. Mine is sluggish and confused, and could not meet sudden and important emergencies. Reader, let this essay of myself run on, and this third extension of the other parts of my painting. I add, but I do not correct. First, because when a man has mortgaged his work to the world, it seems to me that he has no further right to it. Let him speak better elsewhere if he can, and not adulterate the work he has sold. From such people nothing should be bought until after their death. Let them think carefully before publishing. Who is hurrying them? My book is always one, except that at each new edition, so that the buyer may not come off completely empty-handed, I allow myself to add, since it is only an ill-fitted patchwork, some extra ornaments. These are only overweights, which do not condemn the original form, but give some special value to each of the subsequent ones by a bit of ambitious subtlety. Thence, however, it will easily happen that some transposition of chronology may slip in, for my stories take their place according to their timeliness, not always according to their age. Second, because, as far as I am concerned, I fear to lose by the change. My understanding does not always go forward, it goes backward too. I distrust my thoughts hardly any less for being second or third than for being first, or for being present than for being past. We often correct ourselves as stupidly as we correct others. My first edition was in the year 1580. Since then I have grown older by a long stretch of time, but certainly I have not grown an inch wiser. Myself now and myself a while ago are indeed two, but when better, I simply cannot say. It would be fine to be old if we travel only toward improvement. It is a drunkard's motion, staggering, dizzy, wobbling, or that of reeds that the wind stirs haphazardly as it pleases. Antiochus had written vigorously in favor of the academy. In his old age he took a different stand. Whichever of the two I followed, should I not still be following Antiochus? After having established the doubtfulness of human opinions, to try to establish their certainty, was that not establishing doubt? Not certainty? And promising that if he had been given another age to live, he would still be ready for some new change, not so much better as different. The favor of the public has given me a little more boldness than I expected, but what I fear most is to surfeit my readers. I would rather irritate them than weary them, as a learned man of my time has done. Praise is always pleasing, from whomever and for whatever reason it may come, yet to enjoy it properly we must be informed of the cause of it. Even imperfections have a way of recommending themselves. Vulgar and popular esteem is seldom happy in its choice, and in my time I am much mistaken if the worst writings are not those which have gotten the best share of the wind of public favor. Certainly I give thanks to those good people who deign to take my feeble efforts in good part. There is no place where the faults of workmanship are so apparent as in material which has nothing in itself to recommend it. Do not blame me, reader, for those that slip in here through the caprice or inadvertency of others. Each hand, each workman contributes its own. I do not concern myself with spelling, and simply order them to follow the old style or with punctuation. I am inexpert in both. When they wholly shatter the sense, I am not much troubled about it, for at least they relieve me of responsibility. But when they substitute a false meaning, as they do so often, and twist me to their view, they ruin me. However, when the thought is not up to my strength, a fair-minded man should reject it as not mine. Anyone who knows how little I like to work, how much I am formed in my own way, will easily believe that I would rather write as many more essays again than subject myself to going over these again for such childish correction. So I was saying a while ago that being planted in the deepest mine of this new metal, an allusion to the juvenile quotation, which itself alludes to the legend of 4 ages, and suggests that a new metal is needed to represent the new depths to which man has sunk. Not only am I deprived of any great familiarity with people of different morals and opinions from mine, by which they hold together with a bond that shuns all other bonds. Montaigne's meaning is probably that he, a Catholic, lives surrounded by Protestants. It may also be that the injustice and wickedness of his neighbors unites them. But also I am not free from danger among people to whom everything is equally permissible, and most of whom cannot make their account with the law worse, from which arises the extreme degree of licentiousness. Counting up all the particular circumstances concerning myself, I find no man of our country to whom the defense of the laws costs more, both in gains ceasing and in damages ensuing, as the lawyers say, than myself. And certain people make much of their zeal and eagerness who, weighing things justly, do much less than I. As a house that has always been free, very accessible, and at anyone's service, for I have never let myself be induced to make it an instrument of war, in which I take part most willingly when it is most distant from my neighborhood. My house has deserved considerable popular affection, and it would be very hard to scold me on my own dunghill. and I think it is a wonderful and exemplary masterpiece that it is still virgin of blood and pillage under so long a storm, with so many changes and disturbances in the neighborhood. For to tell the truth, it was possible for a man of my disposition to escape any one constant and continued form of danger, whatever it might be, but the conflicting invasions and incursions and alternations and vicissitudes of fortune around me have up to now more exasperated than mollified the temper of the country, and burdened me again and again with insuperable dangers and difficulties. I escape, but I dislike the fact that it is more by good luck, and even by my prudence, than because of justice. I dislike being outside the protection of the laws and under another safeguard than theirs. As things stand, I live more than half by others' favor, which is a harsh obligation. I do not want to owe my safety either to the kindness and benignity of the great, who approve of my obedience to the laws and my independence, or to the affable ways of my predecessors and myself. For what if I were different? If my conduct and the frankness of my dealings obligate my neighbors or my kinsmen, it is cruel that they can acquit themselves of letting me live and say, we grant him leave to continue to hold the divine service freely in the chapel of his house, all the churches around having been emptied and ruined by us, and we grant him the use of his property and his life, since he shelters our wives and our cattle in time of need. For a long time in my house have had a share in the praise given to Lycurgus, the Athenian, who was the general depositary and guardian of his fellow citizens' purses. Now I hold that we should live by right and authority, not by reward or favor. How many gallant men have chosen rather to lose their lives than to owe them? I avoid subjecting myself to any sort of obligation, but especially any that binds me by a debt of honor. I find nothing so expensive as that which is given me, and for which my will remains mortgaged by the claim of gratitude, and I more willingly accept services that are for sale. Rightly so, I think. For the latter I give only money, for the others I give myself. The tie that binds me by the law of honesty seems to me much tighter and more oppressive than is that of legal constraint. A notary ties me down more gently than I do myself. It is not reasonable that my conscience should be much more firmly bound in matters in which someone relies on it alone. In other cases my fidelity owes nothing, for nothing has been lent it. Let them use the trust and security they have taken outside of me. I would much rather break the imprisonment of a wall and of the laws than that of my word. I am scrupulous to the point of superstition in keeping my promises, and I like to make them uncertain and conditional in all matters. To those of no weight I give weight by jealous regard for my rule. It torments me and burdens me with its own interest. Yes, even in undertakings in which I am alone concerned and wholly free, if I say what I plan to do, it seems to me that I prescribe it for myself, and that to give knowledge of it to another is to impose it upon myself. It seems to me that I promise it when I mention it. Thus I seldom err my plans. The sentence I pass upon myself is sharper and stiffer than that of the judges, who only consider me with respect to common obligation. The grip of my conscience is tighter and more severe. I am lax in following duties to which I should be dragged if I did not go to them. Even a just action is just only in so far as it is voluntary. Cicero. If the action does not have something of the splendor of freedom, it has neither grace nor honor. When I am forced by law, my will gives scant assent. When necessity tugs me, I like to relax my will, because whatever is exacted by power is ascribed rather to him who commands than to him who executes. Valerius Maximus. I know some who follow this vein to the point of injustice, who give rather than give back, lend rather than pay, and do good most stingily to the person they are obligated to. I do not go that far, but I come close to it. I am so fond of throwing off burdens and obligations that I have sometimes counted as profit the ingratitude, affronts, and indignities that I had received from those to whom, either by nature or by accident, I owed some duty of friendship, taking the occasion of their offense as that much acquittance and discharge of my debt. Although I continue to pay them the external civilities that public interest prescribes, I find it a great saving, all the same, to do for the sake of justice what I used to do for the sake of affection, and to relieve myself a little of the inner tension and solicitude of my will. It is the part of a wise man to restrain, as he would a chariot, the first impulse of goodwill. Cicero. Which is a little too urgent and pressing when I put my heart into it, at least for a man who has no wish to be under pressure, and this economy serves me as some consolation for the imperfections of those with whom I am concerned. To be sure, I am sorry that they are worth less for it, but the fact remains that I am also spared in this way something of my diligence and obligation toward them. I approve of a man who loves his son less for being mangy or hunchbacked, and not only when he is malicious, but also when he is ill-favored and ill-born. God himself has taken off that much from his natural value and estimation, provided he bears himself in his coolness toward him with moderation and exact justice. With me, nearness of kin does not alleviate defects, it rather aggravates them. After all, as far as I understand the science of benefaction and gratitude, which is a subtle science and of great utility, I see no one freer and less indebted than I am up to this point. What I owe to the ordinary and natural obligations. There is no one who is more absolutely clear of any others. The gifts of princes are to me unknown. Princes give me much if they take nothing from me, and do me enough good when they do me no harm. That is all I ask of them. Oh, how much I am obliged to God that it was his pleasure that I should receive all I have directly from his grace, and that he has kept all my indebtedness for himself privately. How earnestly I beseech his holy mercy that I may never owe thanks for essential things to anyone. Blessed liberty, which has guided me so far, may it continue to the end. I try to have no expressed need of anyone. All my hope is in myself. This is a thing that each man can arrange for himself, but more easily those whom God has sheltered from natural and urgent necessities. It is very pitiful and hazardous to be dependent on another. We ourselves, who are our most proper and certain resource, have not made ourselves secure enough. I have nothing of my own but myself, and even there my possession is partly defective and borrowed. I cultivate both my courage, which is the stronger, and also my fortune, to find in them enough to satisfy me if everything else should forsake me. Hippias of Elis furnished himself not merely with learning, that in the lap of the muses he might, in case of need, dispense cheerfully with any other company, not merely with the knowledge of philosophy to teach his soul to be contented with itself and manfully to do without the comforts that come to it from outside when fate so ordains. He was so careful as to learn also to cook, to shave, and to make his clothes, his shoes, and his rings, so as to be self-sufficient as he could, and escape from dependence on outside help. We enjoy borrowed goods much more freely and gaily when our enjoyment is not forced and constrained by need, and when we have, both in our will and in our fortune, the strength and the means to do without them. I know myself well, but it is hard for me to imagine anyone's liberality so pure, any hospitality so free and genuine, that it would not seem to me ill-favored, tyrannical, and tainted with reproach if necessity had entangled me in it. As giving is an ambitious quality and a prerogative, so is accepting a quality of submission. Witness Bajazet's insulting and quarrelsome refusal of the presents that Tamerlane sent him, and those offered on behalf of Emperor Suleiman to the Emperor of Calicut made him so angry that not only did he refuse them rudely, saying that neither he nor his predecessors were accustomed to take, and that it was their part to give, But besides, he had the ambassadors sent for this purpose thrown into a dungeon. When Thetis, says Aristotle, flatters Jupiter, when the Lacedaemonians flatter the Athenians, they do not keep refreshing their memory of the good they have done them, which is always odious, but their memory of the benefits they have received from them. A man whom I see so freely making use of one and all, and putting himself under obligation to them, would not do so if he weighed the bond of an obligation as carefully as a wise man should. Perhaps sometimes it is paid, but it is never dissolved. Cruel fetters for a man who likes to give his freedom elbow room in all directions. Those who know me, both above and below me, know whether they have ever seen a man less demanding of others. If I surpass all modern examples in this respect, it is no great wonder, for so many parts of my character contribute to it: a little natural pride, inability to endure refusal, limitation of my desires and designs, incapacity for any kind of business, my very favorite qualities, idleness and freedom. Through all these I have conceived a mortal hatred of being obliged either to another or by another than myself. I employ every power to the utmost to do without, before I employ the kindness of another, however slight or weighty the occasion. My friends annoy me greatly when they ask me to ask a favor of a third person, and it seems to me hardly less expensive to release a man who is indebted to me by using him, than to bind myself for my friend's sake to a man who owes me nothing, expecting that condition and this other, that they desire of me nothing involving trouble and care, for I have declared war to the death against all care. I am accommodating and approachable for any man's need. But I have avoided receiving still more than I have sought to give, and indeed this is much the easier choice according to Aristotle. My fortune has allowed me to do but little good to others, and what little it has allowed me it has assigned to rather meager quarters. If it had brought me into the world to hold some rank among men, I should have been ambitious to make myself loved, not to make myself feared or admired. Shall I express this more insolently? I should have thought as much of giving pleasure as of gaining profit. Cyrus very wisely, and through the mouth of a very good captain and still better philosopher, Xenophon, esteems his kindness and his good deeds far beyond his valor and his warlike conquests. And Scipio the elder, whenever he wants to put his best foot forward, gives more weight to his affability and humanity than to his hardihood and his victories. And he has ever in his mouth this proud saying, that he left his enemies as good reason to love him as his friends. I mean to say, then, that if we must thus owe something, it should be by a more legitimate title than the one I am speaking of, to which the law of this miserable war binds me, and not with so great a debt as that of my total preservation that overwhelms me. I have gone to bed 1,000 times in my own home, imagining that someone would betray me and slaughter me that very night, arranging with fortune that it should be without fright and not lingering, and after my paternoster I have cried out, "Shall a godless soldier possess these well-tilled fields?" Virgil. What remedy is there? It is my birthplace and that of most of my ancestors. They set on it their affection and their name. We become hardened to whatever we are accustomed to, and for a wretched condition such as ours, a very favorable gift of nature is habit, which benumbs our senses to the suffering of many ills. Civil wars are worse in this respect than other wars, that they make us all sentinels in our own houses. How sad to guard our life with gate and wall, and scarcely trust the strength of our own hall. Ovid. It is a great extremity to be beset even in our household and domestic repose. The region where I live is always the first and the last in the battles of our troubled times, and peace never shows her full face there. Even in time of peace they quake for fear of war. Ovid. Whenever fortune stirs unrest, then war is rife. I would be better blessed if placed beneath the sun of Orient, or in the frozen north under a nomad's tent. Lucan. I sometimes derive from nonchalance and laxity a way of strengthening myself against these considerations, They too, of some extent, lead us toward fortitude. It often happens that I imagine and await mortal dangers with some pleasure. I plunge head down stupidly into death without looking at it and recognizing it as into a silent and dark abyss which swallows me up at one leap and overwhelms me in an instant with a heavy sleep free from feeling and pain. And in these quick and violent deaths, the consequence that I foresee gives me more comfort than the occurrence gives me fear. They say that as life is not better for being long, so death is better for not being long. It is not so much that I keep aloof from the thought of being dead as that I enter into familiar terms with dying. I wrap myself up and nestle in this storm, so that it must blind me and sweep me away furiously with a sudden numbing attack. Even so, if it happen to be true, as some gardeners say, that roses and violets spring up more fragrant near garlic and onions, because these draw in and suck up whatever there is that smells bad in the ground, and if likewise these depraved natures absorbed all the venom of my air and climate and made me all the better and purer for their vicinity, I would not be wholly a loser. That is not the case, but there may be something in this, that goodness is more beautiful and attractive when it is rare, and that contrariety and diversity strengthen well-doing and compress it within itself, and inflame it by jealousy of opposition and love of glory. Robbers are gracious enough to have no particular grudge against me. Have I any against them? I should have to hate too many people, like consciences, under different kinds of fortune, harbor like cruelty, disloyalty, and robbery, and it is all the worse when it is more cowardly, more secure and dark in the shadow of the laws. I hate open injustice less than treacherous injustice, warlike less than peaceful injustice. Our fever has come upon a body that is hardly the worse for it. The fire was there, it has caught flame, the noise is greater, the evil little greater. I ordinarily reply to those who ask me the reason for my travels that I know well what I am fleeing from, but not what I am looking for. If they tell me that among foreigners there may be just as little health, and that their ways are no better than ours, I reply first that that is not easy. So many are the shapes of crime, Virgil. Second, that it is always a gain to change a bad state for an uncertain one, and that the troubles of others should not sting us like our own. I do not want to forget this, that I never rebel so much against France as not to regard Paris with a friendly eye. She has had my heart since my childhood, and it has happened to me in this as happens with excellent things. The more other beautiful cities I have seen since, the more the beauty of Paris has power over me and wins my affection. I love her for herself, and more in her own essence than overloaded with foreign pomp. I love her tenderly even to her warts and her spots. I am a Frenchman only by this great city, great in population, great in felicity of her situation, but above all great and incomparable in variety and diversity of the good things of life. The glory of France, and one of the noblest ornaments of the world. May God drive our discords far from her. Entire and united, I think she is protected against any other violence. I warn her that of all parties the worst will be the one that throws her into discord, and for her I fear only herself, and I fear certainly as much for her as for any other part of the state. As long as she endures, I shall not lack a retreat in which to give up the ghost, sufficient to make me lose my regret for any other retreat. Not because Socrates said it, but because it is really my feeling, and perhaps excessively so. I consider all men my compatriots, and embrace a Pole as I do a Frenchman, setting this national bond after the universal and common one. I am scarcely infatuated with the sweetness of my native air. Brand new acquaintances that are wholly of my own choice seem to me to be well worth those other common chance acquaintances of the neighborhood. Friendships purely of our own acquisition usually surpass those to which community of climate or of blood binds us. Nature has put us into the world free and unfettered. We imprison ourselves in certain narrow districts, like the kings of Persia, who bound themselves never to drink any other water than that of the river Chospes, stupidly gave up their right to use any other waters, and dried up all the rest of the world as far as they were concerned. What Socrates did near the end of his life in considering a sentence of exile against him worse than a sentence of death, I shall never, I think, be so broken or so strictly attached to my own country as to do. These divine lives have quite a few aspects that I embrace more by esteem than by affection, and there are also some so lofty and extraordinary that I cannot embrace them even by esteem, inasmuch as I cannot understand them. That was a very fastidious attitude for a man who considered the world his city. It is true that he disdained peregrination and had scarcely set foot outside the territory of Attica. What are we to say of his grudging his friend's money to save his life, and refusing to get out of prison by the intervention of others, so as not to disobey the laws, and that at a time when they were so thoroughly corrupt? These examples are of the first type for me. Of the second type are others that I could find in this same person. Many of these rare examples exceed my power of performing, but some even exceed my power of judging. Besides these reasons, travel seems to me a profitable exercise. The mind is continually exercised in observing new and unknown things, and I know no better school, as I have often said, for forming one's life, than to set before it constantly the diversity of so many other lives, ideas, and customs, and to make it taste such a perpetual variety of forms of our nature. In it the body is neither idle nor overworked, and this moderate movement puts it in good condition. I stay on horseback, though I have the colic, without dismounting and without pain, for 8 or 10 hours, beyond the strength and lot of age. Virgil. No season is hostile to me, except the fierce heat of a burning sun, for umbrellas which Italy has used since the ancient Romans burden the arm more than they relieve the head. I should like to know what device the Persians had so long ago, in the infancy of luxury, to make themselves a fresh breeze and shade at their pleasure, as Xenophon relates. I love rain and mud like a duck. Change of air and climate has no effect on me. All skies are alike to me. Only the inward troubles that I produce in myself get the better of me, and they attack me less when I travel. I am hard to set in motion, but once under way, I go as far as anyone wants. I balk as much at little undertakings as at great ones, and at getting equipped for a day's trip and a visit to a neighbor as for a real journey. I have learned to make my day's journey Spanish fashion, at a single stage, long and sensible stages, and in extreme heat I make them by night, from sunset to sunrise. The other way of eating your dinner on the way in haste and confusion is inconvenient, especially on short days. My horses are the better for it. Never has a horse failed me that could not make the first day's trip with me. I water them everywhere, and only see to it that they have enough road left to settle their water. My laziness in getting up gives my attendants time to dine at their ease before starting. As for me, it is never too late for me to eat. Appetite comes to me as I eat, and not otherwise. I am never at all hungry except at table. Some people complain of my taking pleasure in continuing this exercise, married and old as I am. They are wrong. It is a better time to leave your family when you have set it on the way to go on without you, when you have left it in an order that will not belie its past arrangement. It is a much greater imprudence to go away, leaving in your house a less faithful guardian, who will have less care to provide for your needs. The most useful and honorable science and occupation for a woman is the science of housekeeping. I know some that are miserly, very few that are good managers. This is her ruling quality, which a man should seek out before any other, as the sole dowry on which the ruin or salvation of our households depends. Don't tell me, from what experience has taught me, I require of a married woman, above all other virtues, the virtues of a good housewife. I place my wife in a position to show these, leaving the entire government of my affairs in her hands by my absence. It irritates me to see in many households Monsieur coming home around noon, harassed and dirty from the middle of business, when Madame is still busy doing her hair and fixing herself up in her boudoir. That is for queens to do, and I'm not even sure about that. It is ridiculous and unfair that the idleness of our wives should be supported by our sweat and toil. No one, if I can help it, shall have readier, quieter, and freer enjoyment of my property than myself. If the husband provides the matter, nature herself wills that the wife provide the form. As for the duties of marital love that some people consider injured by absence, I do not believe it. On the contrary, it is a relationship that is readily cooled by too continual association, and harmed by assiduity. Every strange woman seems to us an attractive woman, and every man feels by experience that seeing one another continually cannot match the pleasure of parting and being together again at intervals. These interruptions fill me with a fresh love for my family and give me back a sweeter enjoyment of my home. Alternation warms my appetite, now for one choice, now for the other. I know that friendship has arms long enough to hold and join from one end of the world to the other, and especially this kind, in which there is a continual interchange of services that reawaken the bond and memory of it. The Stoics indeed say that there is so great a tie and fellowship between the sages that the one who dines in France feeds his comrade in Egypt, and that if one merely extends his finger wherever he is, all the sages on the habitable earth feel help from it. Enjoyment and possession are principally a matter of imagination. It embraces more warmly what it is in quest of than what we have at hand, and more continually. Count up your daily musings, and you will find that you are most absent from your friend when he is in your company. His presence relaxes your attention and gives your thoughts liberty to absent themselves at any time and for any reason. From the distance of Rome, I keep and control my house and the goods I have left behind there. I see my walls, my trees, and my revenue grow and decrease within 2 inches, just as when I am there. My house appears before my eyes and informs of places loved. Ovid. If we enjoy only what we touch, farewell to our crowns when they are in our coffers, and our children if they are off hunting. We want them nearer. In the garden, is that far? Half a day away? What about 10 leagues? Is that far or near? If it is near, what about 11, 12, 13, and so on, step by step? Truly, if there is a woman who will prescribe to her husband after how many steps ends the near, and with how many steps begins the far, I would advise her to stop him in between. Let's set an end, and with debate have done. I use my freedom and subtract your units one by one, as bit by bit I might pluck out hairs from a horse's tail until the pile has dwindled and my arguments prevail. Horse. And let them boldly call philosophy their aid, which someone might accuse, since it sees neither one end nor the other of the joint between too much and too little, long and short, light and heavy, near and far, since it cannot recognize either the beginning or the end of it, of being a very uncertain judge of the middle. Nature has given us no knowledge of the limits of things. Cicero. Are they not still wives and mistresses of the deceased, who are not at the end of this world, but in the other world? We embrace both those who have been and those who are not yet, not merely the absent. We have not made a bargain in getting married to keep continually tied to each other by the tail, like some little animals or other that we see, or like the bewitched people of Carinthia in dog-like fashion. And a wife should not have her eyes so greedily fixed on the front of her husband that she cannot see the back of him if need be. But may not this remark of that most excellent painter of their humors be applicable here to show the cause of their complaints? If you are late, your wife assumes you're having an affair with someone, or someone with you, drinking, banishing care, that you alone have all the fun, she all the ills to bear. Terence. Or might it not be that opposition and contradiction are in themselves meat and drink to them, and that they are comfortable enough provided they make you uncomfortable? In true friendship, in which I am an expert, I give myself to my friend more than I draw him to me. I not only like doing him good better than having him do me good, but also would rather have him do good to himself than to me. He does me most good when he does himself good, and if absence is pleasant or useful to him, it is much sweeter to me than his presence, and it is not really absence when we have means of communication. In other days, I made use and advantage of our separation. We filled and extended our possession of life better by separating. He lived, he enjoyed, he saw for me, and I for him, as fully as if he had been there. One part of us remained idle when we were together. We were fused into one. Separation in space made the conjunction of our wills richer. This insatiable hunger for bodily presence betrays a certain weakness in the enjoyment of souls. As for my old age, which they bring up against me, it is, on the contrary, for youth to be enslaved to public opinion and to constrain itself for the sake of others. It can give satisfaction to both, to the public and to itself. We have only too much to do to satisfy ourselves alone. As natural comforts fail us, let us sustain ourselves with artificial ones. It is unjust to excuse youth for following its pleasures and to forbid old age to seek any. Young, I covered up my blithe passions with prudence. Old, I dispersed my sad ones by dissipation. Besides, the Platonic laws prohibit traveling before the age of 40 or 50 to make the travel more useful and instructive. I would more willingly agree to the second article of the same laws, which forbids it after 60. But at such an age, you will never return from so long a journey. What do I care? I undertake it neither to return from it nor to complete it. I undertake only to move about while I like moving, and I walk for the sake of walking. Those who run after a benefice or a hare do not run. They only run who run at prisoner's base and to practice running. My plan is everywhere divisible. It is not based on great hopes. Each day's journey forms an end, and the journey of my life is conducted in the same way. However, I have seen enough distant places where I should have liked to be detained. Why not? If Chrysippus, Cleanthes, Diogenes, Zeno, Antipater, and so many sages of the surliest sect left their country indeed with no cause for complaint about it, and solely for the enjoyment of a different atmosphere. Truly the greatest trouble with my peregrinations is that I cannot bring to them a resolution to fix my abode wherever I please, and that I must always be thinking of coming back to conform to popular feelings. If I were afraid to die in any other place than that of my birth, if I thought I would die less comfortably away from my family, I should scarcely go out of France. I should not go out of my parish without terror. I feel death continually clutching me by the throat or the loins, but I am made differently. Death is the same to me anywhere. However, if I had the choice, it would be, I think, rather on horseback than in bed, and out of my house, away from my people. There is more heartbreak than consolation in taking leave of our friends. I willingly forget that duty of our courtesy, for of all the duties of friendship, that is the only unpleasant one, and I would forget just as willingly to bid that great eternal farewell. If some advantage is derived from this audience, there are 100 disadvantages. I have seen many dying men pitifully besieged by all this throng. The crowd stifles them. It is contrary to duty and testimony of scant affection and scant concern to let you die in peace. One torments your eyes, another your ears, another your tongue. There is not a sense or a part of you that they do not shatter. Your heart is wrung with pity to hear the laments of your friends, and perhaps with anger to hear other laments that are feigned and counterfeit. A man who has always had fastidious taste finds them more so when he is in a weakened condition. In such great need he must have a gentle hand, suited to his feelings, to scratch him just where he itches. Otherwise he should not be touched at all. If we need a wise woman, sage femme, midwife, to bring us into the world, we certainly need a still wiser man to help us out of it. Such a man, and a friend to boot, should be purchased at any price to assist us on such an occasion. I have not attained that disdainful vigor which finds fortitude in itself, which nothing can either aid or disturb. I am a peg lower. I try to burrow and hide from this passing, not through fear, but through design. It is not my idea to prove or display my fortitude in this act of dying. For whom, then, will end all my right to reputation and my interest in it? I am content with a collected, calm, and solitary death, all my own, in keeping with my retired and private life, in contrast with the Roman superstition, which considered a man unfortunate who died without speaking, and who did not have his nearest relatives to close his eyes. I have enough to do to console myself without having to console others, enough thoughts in my head without having circumstances bring me new ones, and enough matter for reflection without borrowing it. Dying is not a rule for society, it is an act for one single character. Let us live and laugh among our friends, let us go die and look sour among strangers. You will find, if you pay, someone who will turn your head, rub your feet, who will not trouble you any more than you want, showing you an indifferent face, letting you reflect and lament as you like. Day by day I rid myself, by reflection, of that childish and inhuman humor that makes us want to arouse compassion and mourning in our friends by our misfortunes. We make more of our troubles than they are worth, to draw their tears, and the firmness in supporting misfortune that we praise in all men we blame and reproach in our friends when the misfortune is our own. We are not content that they should be aware of our woes unless they are also afflicted by them. We should spread joy but cut down sadness as much as we can. He who asks for pity without reason is a man not to be pitied when there is reason. To be always lamenting for ourselves is the way never to be lamented. By continually putting on a pitiful act, we become pitiable to no one. He who acts dead when still alive is subject to be thought alive when dying. I have seen it get some people's goat to be told that their color was good and their pulse even. I have seen them restrain their laughter because it betrayed their recovery, and hate health because it was not pitiable. What is more, they were not women. I represent my ailments at most just as they are, and avoid words of foreboding and deliberate exclamations. If not cheerfulness, at least a composed countenance is appropriate in people attending a sick sage. Just because he sees himself in the opposite condition, he does not pick a quarrel with health. He likes to contemplate it strong and entire in others, and enjoy it at least by association. Just because he feels himself slipping, he does not utterly reject thoughts of life, or avoid ordinary conversation. I want to study sickness when I am healthy. When it is on me, it makes its impression real enough, without the help of my imagination. We prepare ourselves beforehand for the journeys we undertake, and are resolved on them. The time when we are to take horse we leave to our companions and put it off for them. I feel this unexpected profit from the publication of my behavior, that to some extent it serves me as a rule. Sometimes there comes to me a feeling that I should not betray the story of my life. This public declaration obliges me to keep on my path, and not to give the lie to the picture of my qualities, which are normally less disfigured and distorted than might be expected from the malice and sickness of the judgments of today. The uniformity and simplicity of my behavior indeed produces an appearance easy to interpret, but because the manner of it is a bit new and unusual, it gives too fine a chance to calumny. Yet the fact is, it seems to me that to anyone who wants to abuse me fairly, I give plenty to bite on in my known and avowed imperfections, and enough to gorge on without skirmishing with the wind. If it seems to him that by beating him to the accusation and revelation myself, I am drawing the teeth of his mordancy, it is reasonable that he should exercise his right of amplification and extension, attack has rights beyond justice, that he should magnify into trees the vices whose roots I show him in myself, and that he should use for this not only those that possess me, but also those that merely threaten me. Harmful vices in both quality and number, let him beat me with them. I would frankly follow the example of the philosopher Bion. Antigonus was trying to taunt him on the subject of his origin. He cut him short. I am, he said, the son of a slave, a butcher, branded, and of a whore whom my father married because of the baseness of his fortune. Both were punished for some misdeed. An orator bought me when I was a child, finding me attractive, and when he died, left me all his possessions. Having transported them to the city of Athens, I devoted myself to philosophy. Let not historians be at a loss in seeking information about me. I will tell them what's what about it. Free and generous confession weakens reproach and disarms slander. Yet the fact remains that all in all, it seems to me that I am as often praised as dispraised beyond reason, even as it seems to me also that from my youth and rank and degree of honor I have been given a place rather above than below what I am entitled to. I should be more at home in a country where these orders of precedence were either regulated or despised. Among men, as soon as an altercation over precedence in walking or sitting goes beyond 3 replies, it is uncivil. I have no fear of ceding or preceding unfairly to avoid such a bothersome argument, and never did a man covet my right to go first, but that I yielded it to him. Besides this profit that I derive from writing about myself, I hope for this other advantage, that if my humors happen to please and suit some worthy man before I die, he will try to meet me. I give him a big advantage in ground covered, for all that long acquaintance and familiarity could have gained for him in several years, he can see in 3 days in this record, and more surely and exactly. Amusing notion, many things that I would not want to tell anyone, I tell the public, and for my most secret knowledge and thoughts I send my most faithful friends to a bookseller's shop. We bear our hearts to scrutiny, Perseus. If by such good signs I knew of a man who was suited to me, truly I would go very far to find him, for the sweetness of harmonious and agreeable company cannot be bought too dearly, in my opinion. Oh, a friend, how true is that old saying, that the enjoyment of one is sweeter and more necessary than that of the elements of water and fire. To return to my story, there is thus no great evil in dying far off and alone. Indeed, we think it a duty to retire for natural actions less unsightly and less hideous than this. But besides, those who are reduced to dragging out a long, lingering life ought perhaps not to wish to involve a large family in their misery. Therefore the Indians in a certain province thought it just to kill a man who had fallen into such straits. In another province they abandoned him alone to keep alive however he could. To whom do the dying not finally make themselves annoying and unbearable? Ordinary duties do not go so far. You teach your best friends perforce to be cruel, hardening both wife and children by long habit not to feel and pity your woes any more. The groans of my colic no longer cause emotion in anyone, and even if we derive some pleasure from their company, which does not always happen, because of the disparity of conditions which easily produces contempt or envy of anyone whatever, is it not too much to take advantage of this for a long period of time? The more I saw them cheerfully restraining themselves for my sake, the more I should be sorry for their pains. We have a right to lean, but not to lie down so heavily on others, or to find our support in their ruin, like the man who had little children's throats cut to use their blood to cure a disease of his own, or that other who was furnished with tender young girls to keep his old limbs warm at night, and mingle the sweetness of their breath with the sourness and oppressiveness of his. I should be prone to recommend Venice to myself for retirement in such a feeble condition of life. Decrepitude is a solitary quality. I am sociable to excess, yet it seems reasonable to me that henceforth I should withdraw my troublesome self from the sight of the world and brood on it by myself, that I should shrink back and retire into my shell like a tortoise. I am learning to see men without clinging to them. That would be an outrage to so steep a pass. It is time to turn my back on company, but on such a long journey you will be forced to stop miserably in some hovel where you will lack everything. Most of the necessary things I carry around with me, and then we cannot escape fortune if she undertakes to attack us. I need nothing extraordinary when I am sick. What nature cannot do for me, I do not want to have done by a pill. At the very beginning of my fevers and the maladies that lay me low, while still whole and in the neighborhood of health, I reconcile myself with God by the last Christian offices, and find myself thereby more free and unburdened, feeling all the more triumphant over the sickness. Of notary and counsel I have less need than of physicians. What affairs of mine I shall not have settled when quite well, let no one expect me to settle when sick. What I mean to do for the service of death is always done. I should not dare delay a single day, and if there is nothing done, that will mean either that doubt has put off my choice, for sometimes not to choose is to choose well, or that I have quite decided to do nothing. I write my book for a few men and a few years. If it had been durable matter, it would have had to be committed to a more stable language, Latin. In view of the continual variation that has prevailed in ours up to now, who can hope that its present form will be in use in 50 years from now? It slips out of our hands every day and has halfway changed since I have been alive. We say that at this moment it is perfected. Every century says as much of its own. I have no mind to think that of it as long as it flees and changes form as it does. It is for the good and useful writings to nail it to themselves, and its credit will go as far as the fortunes of our state. Therefore I do not fear to insert a number of personal items whose usefulness will not extend beyond this generation, and which touch on things particularly known to some who will see further into them than those of ordinary understanding. After all this I do not want people to go on debating, as often I see them troubling the memory of the dead. He thought thus, he lived thus, he wanted this. If he had spoken as he was dying, he would have said, he would have given, I knew him better than anyone else. Now, as far as decency permits me, I here make known my inclinations and feelings, but I do so more freely and willingly by word of mouth to anyone who wishes to be informed of them. At all events, in these memoirs, if you look around, you will find that I have said everything or suggested everything. What I cannot express, I point to with my finger. But if you have a penetrating mind, these little tracts will serve the rest to find. Lucretius. I leave nothing about me to be desired or guessed. If people are to talk about me, I want it to be truly and justly. I would willingly come back from the other world to give the lie to any man who betrayed me other than I was, even if it were to honor me. Even the living, I perceive, are spoken of otherwise than they really are. And if I had not supported with all my strength the friend that I lost, they would have torn him into 1,000 contrasting appearances. Montaigne is speaking about La Boétie, here in the 1588 edition added, I know well that I will leave behind no sponsor anywhere near as affectionate and understanding about me as I was about him. There is no one to whom I would be willing to entrust myself fully for a portrait. He alone enjoyed my true image and carried it away. That is why I myself decipher myself so painstakingly. In the Bordeaux copy, after portrait, Montaigne added, and then crossed out, and if there should be any, I repudiate them, for I know them to be excessively prejudiced in my favor. All this was deleted presumably out of consideration for Montaigne's covenant daughter and literary executrix Marie de Gournay. To finish telling my feeble humors, I confess that in my travels I hardly ever come to my lodgings without the question passing through my mind whether I could be sick and dying there in my comfort. I want to be lodged in a place that I will have all to myself, not noisy or dirty or smoky or stuffy. I try to humor death by these frivolous circumstances, or rather to relieve myself of any other encumbrance, so that I can give my attention exclusively to it, which will easily weigh me down enough without any other load. I want death to have a share in the ease and comfort of my life. It is a great and important part of it. I hope that from this day forth it will not belie the past. Death has some shapes that are easier than others, and assumes different qualities according to each man's fancy. Among natural deaths, that which comes from enfeeblement and stupor seems to me gentle and pleasant. Among violent ones, I picture less comfortably falling from a precipice than being crushed by a falling building, and a piercing sword thrust than a harquebus shot, and I'd rather have drunk the potion of Socrates than stab myself like Cato, and, though it is all one, yet my imagination feels as great a difference between throwing myself into a fiery furnace and into the channel of a shallow river, as between death and life. So foolishly does our fear consider the means more than the result. It is only an instant, but it is of such gravity that I would willingly give several days of my life to go through it in my own way. Such each man in his imagination finds it more or less bitter, since each man has some choice between forms of dying. Let us try a little further to find one that is free from all unpleasantness. Might we not make it even voluptuous, as did the partners in death of Antony and Cleopatra? I leave aside the harsh and exemplary achievements of philosophy and religion, but among men of little account there have been some, such as Petronius and Tigellinus in Rome, who pledged to kill themselves, put death as it were to sleep by the comfort of their preparations. They made it flow and glide past amid the laxity of their customary pastimes, among wenches and gay companions. No talk of consolation, no mention of a will, no ambitious affectation of constancy, no discourse about their future state, but amidst games, feasting, jests, common and ordinary conversation, music, and amorous verse. Could we not imitate this resoluteness with more decent behavior? Since there are deaths good for fools, deaths good for wise men, let us find some that are good for people in between. In my imagination, I can conceive of an easy and, since die we must, comparatively desirable form of death. The Roman tyrants thought they were giving his life to a criminal when they gave him the choice of his death. But was not Theophrastus, a philosopher so delicate, modest, and wise, forced by reason to dare to speak this line, Latinized by Cicero? Fortune, not wisdom, rules the life of man. How easy fortune makes it for me to trade in my life, having placed it in such a position that henceforth it is neither necessary nor a hindrance to anyone. It is a condition that I would have accepted at any season of my life, but now that it is time to pack up my odds and ends and strap my bags, I take most particular pleasure in giving scarcely any pleasure or displeasure to anyone by dying. Fortune has contrived, by an artful compensation, that those who can hope for some material profit from my death will receive at the same time a material loss from it. Death often weighs heavier on us by its weight on others, and pains us by their pain almost as much as by our own, and sometimes even more. Among the comforts I seek in lodgings, I do not include pomp or large size. Rather, I hate them, but a certain simple cleanliness which is more often met with in places where there is less art, and which nature honors with a certain grace that is all her own. A meal where not abundance but neatness prevails. Lipsius. More wit than expense. See Nepos. And then, the people who are likely to be surprised by death on the road are those whom business forces to go through the grisons in midwinter. I, who travel most often for my pleasure, do not direct myself so badly. If it looks ugly on the right, I take the left. If I find myself unfit to ride my horse, I stop. And in so doing, I truly see nothing that is not as pleasant and comfortable as my own house. It is true that I find superfluity always superfluous, and feel uneasy even amid delicacy and abundance. Have I left something unseen behind me? I go back. It is still on my road. I trace no fixed line, either straight or crooked. Do I fail to find what I have been told about in the place I go? As it often happens that the judgments of others do not agree with mine, and I have found them more often wrong, I do not regret my trouble. I have learned that what they told me about was not there. I have as adaptable a constitution and as ordinary tastes as any man in the world. The diversity in fashions from one nation to another affects me only with the pleasure of variety. Each custom has its reason. Let there be plates of tin, wood, or earthenware, boiled meat or roast, butter or nut oil or olive oil, hot or cold food, it is all the same to me, so much the same that as I grow older, I blame this liberal capacity and shall need to be fastidious and choosy to check my indiscriminate appetite and to give a rest to my stomach now and then. When I have been outside of France and people have asked me out of courtesy if I wanted to be served in French fashion, I have laughed at the idea and made straight for the tables thickest with foreigners. I am ashamed to see my countrymen besotted with that stupid disposition to shy away from ways contrary to their own. They think they are out of their element when they are out of their village. Wherever they go, they stick to their ways and abominate foreign ones. Do they find a compatriot hungry? They celebrate this adventure, see them rally round and join forces, and condemn all the barbarous customs that they see. Why not barbarous, since they are not French? Still, these are the ablest ones, who have noticed them enough to abuse them. Most of them take the trip only for the return. They travel covered and wrapped in a taciturn and incommunicative prudence, defending themselves from the contagion of an unknown atmosphere. What I am saying about these men reminds me of what I have sometimes observed in a similar situation in some of our young courtiers. They stick exclusively with men of their own sort and look upon us as people from the other world with contempt or pity. Take away from them their talk of the mysteries of court, and they are out of their field, as green and clumsy to us as we are to them. It is very truly said that a well-bred man is an all-round man. On the contrary, I travel very fed up with our own ways, not to look for Gascons in Sicily. I have enough of them at home. I rather look for Greeks and Persians. These men I talk to, I study. It is to them I attune and apply myself. And what is more, it seems to me that I have encountered hardly any customs that are not as good as ours. I am not risking much, for I have hardly been out of sight of my weather vanes. For the rest, most of the chance company you meet on the road is more of a nuisance than a pleasure. I do not attach myself to it, especially now that old age sets me somewhat alone and apart from the common ways. You suffer for others, or others for you. Both discomforts are painful, but the latter seems to me even harsher. It is rare good fortune, but inestimably comforting to have a worthy man of sound understanding and ways that conform with yours, who likes to go with you. I have missed such a man extremely on all my travels, but such company must have been chosen and acquired before you leave home. No pleasure has any savor for me without communication. Not even a merry thought comes to my mind without my being vexed at having produced it alone without anyone to offer it to. If wisdom were given me on this condition that I keep it hidden and unuttered, I should reject it. Seneca. The other raised it a tone higher. If such a life were granted a wise man that with an abundance of all things pouring in, he could have full leisure to consider and contemplate everything worth knowing, still, if his solitude were such that he could never see a human being, he would abandon life. Cicero. I like the idea of Archatas, that it would be unpleasant to be even in heaven and to wander among those great and divine celestial bodies without the presence of a companion. But still it is better to be alone than in boring and foolish company. Aristippus liked to live as a stranger everywhere. If fate permitted me my life to guide, as I myself decide. Virgil. I should choose to spend it with my rear in the saddle, eager to see where the sun's fires hold revelry, where clouds and rain sport humidly. Horace. Have you no more comfortable pastimes? What do you lack? Is not your house open to fine healthy air, sufficiently furnished, and more than sufficiently capacious? Royal majesty with all its pomp has put up there more than once. Henry of Navarre spent the night in Montaigne, once in 1584 and once in 1587. Are there not more families below yours in orderliness than there are above it in eminence? Is some extraordinary, indigestible domestic worry festering in you, which, planted in your breast, burns and torments you? Where do you think you can exist without constraint and without disturbance? Fortune never grants unmixed favors. Then realize that you are the only one who constrains you, and that you will follow yourself everywhere and be sorry for yourself everywhere. For there is no satisfaction here below except for souls either brutish or divine. If a man has no contentment with such just occasion for it, where does he expect to find it? For how many thousands of men does such a condition as yours set the limit of their desires? Reform yourself alone, for in that your power is complete, whereas your only right toward fortune is patience. There is no peace and quiet except that which reason has contrived. I see the reasonableness of this admonition, and see it perfectly well, but it would have been quicker and more to the point to tell me, in a word, be wise. This resolution is beyond wisdom. It is wisdom's work and product. The physician does thus who keeps shouting at a poor languishing patient to be cheerful. He would be advising him a little less ineptly if he told him, be well. For my part, I am but a man of the lower sort. A solitary precept, definite, easy to understand, is, be content with what is yours, that is to say, with reason. Yet the execution of it is no more in the power of the wisest men than in mine. It is a popular saying, but terribly far-reaching. What does it not comprehend? All things are subject to distinction and modification. I know well that if you take it literally, this pleasure in traveling is a testimony of restlessness and irresolution, and indeed these are our ruling and predominant qualities. Yes, I confess I see nothing, even in a dream or a wish, that I could hold myself to. Variety alone satisfies me, and the enjoyment of diversity, at least if anything, satisfies me. In traveling, I am encouraged by the very fact that I can stop without loss, and that I have a place where I can turn aside from it comfortably. I love a private life because it is by my own choice that I love it, not because of unfitness for public life, which is perhaps just as well suited to my nature. I serve my prince the more gaily because I do so by the free choice of my judgment and my reason, without personal obligation, and because I am not thrown back on his service and constrained to it by being unacceptable and unwelcome to every other party. So with the rest, I hate the morsels that necessity carves for me. Any advantage on which I had to depend exclusively would have me by the throat. Let one oar row in water, the other on the shore. A single cord never keeps me in place. There is vanity, you say, in this amusement, but where is there not? And these fine precepts are vanity, and all wisdom is vanity. The Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. These exquisite subtleties are only fit for preaching. They are arguments that would send us all saddled into the other world. Life is a material and corporeal movement, an action which by its very essence is imperfect and irregular. I apply myself to it, serving it in its own way. We suffer each a half-made fate. We must so act as not to oppose the universal laws of nature, but these being safeguarded, let us follow our own nature. What is the use of these lofty points of philosophy on which no human being can settle, and these rules that exceed our use and our strength? I often see people propose to us patterns of life which neither the proposer nor his hearers have any hope of following, or, what is more, any desire to follow. From the same sheet of paper on which he has just written the sentence against an adulterer, the judge steals a scrap for a billet doux to his colleague's wife. The lady you have just been rubbing against in illicit intercourse will presently, in your very presence, cry out more bitterly against the same fault in her friend that would Portia. And some condemn men to die for crimes that they do not even regard as faults. In my youth, I have seen a gentleman offer the public with one hand verses excelling both in beauty and in licentiousness, and with the other, at the same moment, the most contentious work on theological reform that the world has feasted on for a long time. This is the way men behave. We let laws and precepts go their own way, we take another, not only because our character is dissolute, but often also because our opinion and judgment oppose them. Listen to a philosophical lecture. the inventiveness, the eloquence, the pertinence immediately strike your mind and stir you. There is nothing that tickles or pricks your conscience. They are not speaking to her, are they? Yet Aristo used to say that neither a bath nor a lesson is any use unless it cleans and scours. You can linger on the bark only after you have extracted the pith, just as after swallowing the good wine out of a beautiful cup we examine its engraving and workmanship. In all the barracks of ancient philosophy you will find this, that the same workman publishes rules of temperance, and publishes at the same time amorous and licentious writings. And Xenophon, in the bosom of Cleinias, wrote against Aristipic sensuality. It is not that there is any miraculous conversion stirring them by fits and starts. Rather it is this, that Solon represents himself now as himself, now in the shape of a lawgiver, now he speaks for the crowd, now for himself, and for himself he takes the free and natural rules, feeling sure of firm and entire health. Like great physicians cure the dangerous ills. Antisthenes permits the sage to love, and to do in his own way whatever he finds opportune, without attention to the laws, inasmuch as he is better advised than they, has more knowledge of virtue. His disciple Diogenes said to oppose reason to perturbations, confidence to fortune, nature to laws. For delicate stomachs we need strict and artificial diets. Good stomachs simply follow the prescriptions of their natural appetite. So do our doctors, who eat the melon and drink the new wine while they keep their patient tied down to syrups and slops. I do not know about their books, said the courtesan Laius, or their wisdom, or their philosophy, but those men knock at my door as often as any others. Since our licentiousness always carries us beyond what is lawful and permitted, men have often made the precepts and laws of our life strict beyond universal reason. None thinks he sins enough unless he sins a little further than the laws permit. It would be desirable that there should be more proportion between the command and the obedience, and a goal that we cannot reach seems unjust. There is no man so good that, if he placed all his actions and thoughts under the scrutiny of the laws, he would not deserve hanging 10 times in his life, even such a man that it would be a very great loss and very unjust to punish and destroy him. Alas, what is it to thee what he does with his skin or she? Martial. And one man might not offend the laws at all, who would not for all that deserve in any degree to be praised as a virtuous man, and whom philosophy would very justly cause to be whipped. So confused and uneven is this relationship. We have no wish to be good men according to God. We cannot be so according to ourselves. Human wisdom has never yet come up to the duties that she has prescribed for herself, and if she ever did come up to them, she would prescribe herself others beyond, to which she would ever aim and aspire. So hostile to consistency is our condition. Man ordains that he himself shall be necessarily at fault. He is not very clever to cut out his own duty by the pattern of a different nature than his own. To whom does he prescribe what he expects no one to do? Is it wrong of him not to do what it is impossible for him to do? The laws which condemn us not to be able themselves accuse us for not being able. At worst, this deformed liberty to present ourselves to in two aspects, the actions in one fashion and the speeches in another, may be permissible for those who tell of things, but it cannot be so for those who tell of themselves, as I do. I must go the same way with my pen as with my feet. Life in society should have some relation to other lives. The virtue of Cato was vigorous beyond the measure of his time, and for a man who took a hand in governing others, a man dedicated to the public service, it might be said that he was a righteousness, if not unrighteous, at least vain and out of season. Even my own conduct, which deviates by hardly an inch from the usual, nevertheless makes me somewhat unapproachable and unsociable to my generation. I do not know if I am disgusted without reason with the world I frequent, but I do know well that it would be without reason if I complain that it was more disgusted with me than I am with it. The virtue assigned to the affairs of the world is a virtue with many bends, angles, and elbows, so as to join and adapt itself to human weakness, mixed and artificial, not straight, clean, constant, or purely innocent. The annals to this day reproach one of our kings for having given in too simply to the conscientious persuasions of his confessor. Affairs of state have bolder precepts. Let him who would be pure from courts retire. I once tried to employ in the service of public dealings ideas and rules for living as crude, green, unpolished, or unpolluted as they were born in me or derived from my education, and which I use, if not conveniently, at least surely in private matters, a scholastic and novice virtue. I found them inept and dangerous for such matters. He who walks in the crowd must step aside, keep his elbows in, step back or advance, even leave the straight way, according to what he encounters. He must live not so much according to himself as according to others, not according to what he proposes to himself, but according to what others propose to him, according to the time, according to the men, according to the business. Plato says that whoever escapes with clean breeches from handling the affairs of the world escapes by a miracle. And he also says that when he ordains that his philosophers shall be head of a government, he does not mean a corrupted government like that of Athens, much less one like ours, on which wisdom herself would waste her Latin. Just as an herb transplanted to a soil very ill-suited to its nature will much rather conform to it than reform it to suit itself, I feel that if I had to train myself thoroughly for such occupations, I should need a great deal of change and reclothing for it. Even if I had enough power over myself to do that, and why couldn't I, with time and pains? I wouldn't want to. By the little experience I have had in that profession, I am just that much disgusted with it. I sometimes feel rising in my soul the fumes of certain temptations toward ambition, but I stiffen and hold firm against them. But thou, Catullus, persevere, persist, quote by Catullus. I am seldom summoned to public affairs, and I offer myself to them just as little. Freedom and laziness, which are my ruling qualities, are qualities diametrically opposite to that trade. We cannot distinguish the faculties of men. They have divisions and boundaries that are delicate and hard to determine. To conclude from the competence of a man's private life some competence for public service is to conclude badly. One man guides himself well who does not guide others well, and produces essays who cannot produce results. Another directs a siege well who would direct a battle badly, and talks well in private who would be bad at addressing a crowd or a prince. In fact, to be able to do one is perhaps rather evidence of inability to do the other than otherwise. I find that lofty minds are hardly less adaptable to humble things than are humble minds to lofty things. It is credible that Socrates should have given the Athenians cause to laugh at his expense because he never could count up the votes of his tribe and make a report on them to the council. Truly, the veneration I have for the perfections of that great man deserves that his fortune should furnish such a magnificent example in excuse of my principal imperfections. Our ability is cut up into little pieces. Mine has no breadth, and its pieces are wretchedly few. Saturnus said to those who had conferred on him full command, "Comrades, you have lost a good captain to make a bad general." Whoever boasts in his sick age like this that he employs a pure and sincere virtue in the service of the world either does not know what virtue is, since our ideas grow corrupt with our conduct. Indeed, hear them portray it. Hear most of them glorying in their behavior and making their rules. Instead of portraying virtue, they portray injustice pure and simple, and vice, and present it thus falsified for the education of princes. Or, if he does know, he boasts wrongly, and, say what he will, does 1,000 things of which his conscience accuses him. I would willingly take Seneca's word about the experience he had in such circumstances, provided he was willing to tell me about it open-heartedly. The most honorable mark of goodness is such a predicament. in such a predicament is to acknowledge freely our fault and that of others, to resist and hold back with all our power the inclination toward evil, to go down that slope unwillingly, to hope for the better and desire the better. I perceive that in the strife that is tearing France to pieces and dividing us into factions, each man labors to defend his cause, but even the best of them resort to dissimulation and lying. Whoever would write about them roundly would write about them rashly and harmfully. The Justice Party is still a member of a worm-eaten and maggoty body, but in such a body the least diseased member is called healthy, and quite rightly, since our qualities have no titles except by comparison. Civic innocence is measured according to the places and the times. I should like very much to see in Xenophon a eulogy of Agesilaus, such as this, that Agesilaus asked by a neighboring prince with whom he had once been at war to let him pass across his territories, granted the request, giving him passage across the Peloponnesus, and not only did not imprison him or poison him, having him at his mercy, but welcomed him courteously, without doing him any harm. To natures like Xenophon's, that would not be saying anything. Elsewhere, and at other times, men will take account of the honesty and magnanimity of such an action. The wretched monkeys in our schools would have laughed at it. So little does Spartan innocence resemble French. We are not without virtuous men, but only by our standards. Whoever has morals established and regulated above his time, either let him twist or blunt his rules, or, would I rather advise him, let him withdraw apart and have nothing to do with us. What would he gain by it? If I discern a man in holiness and virtue rare, to a two-headed child this freak of nature I compare, or to a pregnant mule, or fish found neath the plowman's share. We may regret better times, but not escape the present. We may wish for different magistrates, but we must nevertheless obey those that are here. And perhaps there is more merit in obeying the bad than the good. As long as the image of the ancient and accepted laws of this monarchy shines in some corner, there will I be planted. If by bad fortune they come to contradict and interfere with each other, and produce two sides dubious and difficult to choose between, my choice is likely to be to steal away and escape from that tempest. In the meantime, nature may lend me a hand, or the hazards of war. Between Caesar and Pompey, I should have declared myself openly. But among those three robbers who came after, I should have had either to hide or to follow with the wind, which I consider permissible when reason no longer guides. Whither do you leave the course, Virgil? This stuffing is a little out of my subject. I go out of my way, but rather by license than carelessness. My ideas follow one another, but sometimes it is from a distance, and look at each other, but with a sidelong glance. I have run my eyes over a certain dialogue of Plato in a fantastic motley in two parts, the beginning part about love, all the rest about rhetoric. The ancients do not fear these changes, and with wonderful grace they let themselves thus be tossed in the wind, or seem to. The titles of my chapters do not always embrace their matter, often they only denote it by some sign, like those other titles, the maid of Andros, the eunuch, or those other names, Sulla, Cicero, Torquatus. I love the poetic gait by leaps and gambols. It is an art, as Plato says, light, flighty, demonic. There are works of Plutarch's in which he forgets his theme, in which the treatment of his subject is found only incidentally, quite smothered in foreign matter. See his movements in the Daemon of Socrates. Lord, what beauty there is in these lusty sallies and this variation, and more so the more casual and accidental they seem. It is the inattentive reader who loses my subject, not I. Some word about it will always be found off in a corner, which will not fail to be sufficient, though it takes little room. I seek out change indiscriminately and tumultuously. My style and my mind alike go roaming. A man must be a little mad if he does not want to be even more stupid. say the precepts of our masters, and even more so their examples. 1,000 poets drag and languish prosaically, but the best ancient prose, and I scatter it here indiscriminately as verse, shines throughout with the vigor and boldness of poetry, and gives the effect of its frenzy. To poetry we must certainly concede mastery and preeminence in speech. The poet, says Plato, seated on the tripod of the Muses, pours out in a frenzy whatever comes into his mouth, like the spout of a fountain, without ruminating and weighing it, and from him escape things of different colors and contradictory substance in an intermittent flow. He himself is utterly poetic, and the old theology is poetry, the scholars say, and the first philosophy. It is the original language of the gods. I want the matter to make its own divisions. It shows well enough where it changes, where it concludes, where it begins, where it resumes, without my interlacing it with words. The links and seams introduced for the benefit of weak or heedless ears, and without writing glosses on myself. Who is there that would not rather not be read than be read sleepily or in passing? Nothing is so useful that it can be of value when taken on the run. If to take up books were to take them in, and if to see them were to consider them, and to run through them were to grasp them, I should be wrong to make myself out quite as ignorant as I say I am. Since I cannot arrest the attention of the reader by weight, it is all to the good if I chance to arrest it by my embroilment. True, but he will afterward repent of having wasted his time over it. That may be, but still he will have wasted his time over it, and then there are natures like that, in whom understanding breeds disdain, who will think the better of me because they will not know what I mean. They will conclude that my meaning is profound from its obscurity, which, to speak in all earnest, I hate very strongly, and I would avoid it if I could avoid myself. Aristotle somewhere boasts of affecting it, blameworthy affectation, because such frequent breaks into chapters as I used at the beginning seemed to me to disrupt and dissolve attention before it was aroused, making it disdain and settle and collect for so little. I have begun making them longer, requiring fixed purpose and assigned leisure. In such an occupation, if you will not give a man a single hour, you will not give him anything, and you do nothing for a man for whom you do nothing except while doing something else. Besides, perhaps I have some personal obligation to speak only by halves, to speak confusedly, to speak discordantly. I was about to say that I am ill disposed toward that killjoy reason, and that if those extravagant projects that torment our lives and those wondrously subtle ideas have any truth in them, I consider it too expensive and inconvenient. On the contrary, I apply myself to make use of vanity itself and asininity, if it brings me any pleasure, and let myself follow my natural inclinations without examining them too closely. I have seen elsewhere ruined houses and statues both divine and human. It is always man we are dealing with. All that is true, and yet I could not revisit the tomb of that great and mighty city so often that I would not marvel at it and revere it. The care of the dead is recommended to us. Now I have been brought up from childhood with these dead. I was familiar with the affairs of Rome long before I was with those of my own house. I knew the Capitol and its location before I knew the Louvre, and the Tiber before the Seine. I have had the abilities and fortunes of Lucullus, Metellus, and Scipio more in my head than those of any of our men. They are dead, so indeed is my father, as completely as they, and he has moved as far from me and from life in 18 years as they have in 1600. Nevertheless, I do not cease to embrace and cherish his memory, his friendship, and his society, in a union that is perfect and very much alive. Indeed, by inclination I pay greater service to the dead. They can no longer help themselves, therefore they need my help all the more. A benefit is less richly bestowed when there is reciprocity and return. Arcesilaus, visiting Ctesibius, who was sick, and finding him poorly off, very quietly slipped under his pillow some money he was giving him, and by concealing it from him, gave him also release from gratitude. Those who have deserved friendship and gratitude from me have never lost it through being no longer there. I have paid them better and more carefully in their absence and ignorance. I speak more affectionately by my friends when there is no way left for them to know of it. Now I have started 100 quarrels in defense of Pompey and for the cause of Brutus. This friendship still endures between us, even present things behold only by imagination. Finding myself useless for this age, I throw myself back upon that other, and am so bewitched by it that the state of that ancient Rome, free, just, and flourishing, for I love neither her birth nor her old age, interests me passionately. Therefore I cannot revisit so often the sight of their streets and houses, and those ruins stretching deep down to the antipodes, that I do not muse over them. Is it by nature or by an error of the imagination that the sight of the places we know were frequented and inhabited by people whose memory is held in honor somehow stirs us more than hearing the story of their deeds or reading their writings? Such is the power of places to call up memories, and in this city this is infinite, for wherever we walk we set our foot on history. Cicero. I like to reflect on their faces, their bearing, and their clothes. I chew over those great names between my teeth, and make them resound in my ears. I venerate them and always rise to honor such great names. Seneca. Of things that are in some part great and admirable, I admire even the common parts. I would enjoy seeing them talk, walk, and sup. It would be ingratitude to despise the remains and images of so many worthy and most valiant men, whom I have seen live and die, and who gives us so many good instructions by their example, if we only knew how to follow them. And then this very Rome that we behold deserves our love, belied for so long and by so many claims to our crown, the only common and universal city. The sovereign magistrate who commands there is acknowledged equally elsewhere. It is a metropolitan city of all Christian nations. The Spaniard and the Frenchman, every man is at home there. To be one of the princes of that state, one need only be of Christendom, wherever it may be. There is no place here below that heaven has embraced with such favorable influence and such constancy. Her very ruin is glorious and stately, more precious for her memorable ruins. Sidonius Apollinaris. Even in the tomb she retains some marks and the picture of empire, that it may be manifest that in one place nature rejoiced in her work. Pliny. Some might blame themselves and rebel inwardly at being tickled by so vain a pleasure. Our humors are not too vain if they are pleasant, whatever they may be, if they give constant contentment to a man capable of common sense. I will not have the heart to pity him. I owe much to fortune, and that up to this point she has done nothing hostile to me, at least nothing beyond my endurance. Might it not be her way to leave in peace those who do not trouble her? The more a man himself denies, the more to that man heaven supplies. Since I am naked, I aspire to join the men who not desire, for they lack much who much require. Worse. If she continues, she will send me hence well contented and satisfied, for nothing more do I annoy the gods. Worse. But beware the crash. There are thousands who are wrecked in port. I easily console myself for what will happen here when I am here no longer. Present things keep me busy enough. The rest I leave to fortune. Ovid. Besides, I do not have that strong bond that they say attaches men to the future by the children who bear their name and their honor, and perhaps I ought to desire them all the less, if they are so desirable. I am only too much attached to the world and to this life by myself. I am content to be in fortune's grip by the circumstances strictly necessary to my existence, without extending her jurisdiction over me in other directions. I have never thought that to be without children was a want that should make life less complete and less contented. The sterile profession has its advantages too. Children are numbered among the things that we have no great reason to desire, especially at this time when it would be so hard to make them good. Nothing good can be produced now, so corrupted are the seeds. Tertullian. And yet, once acquired, they give one good reason to regret their loss. He who left me in charge of my house predicted that I was due to ruin it, considering how little I was inclined toward domesticity. He was mistaken. Here I am, when I first came into it, if not a little better off, yet without public office and without benefice. For the rest, if fortune has done me no violent or extraordinary injury, neither has she done me any great favor. All her gifts that my house enjoys were there more than 100 years before me. For my own part, I possess no essential and solid benefit that I owe to her liberality, for she has done me some windy favors, honorary, and titular, without substance, and in truth did not merely grant them, but offered them to me unmasked. Lord knows, to me who am wholly material, whom only reality satisfies, and a very massive reality, and who, if I dare confess it, should not judge avarice much less excusable than ambition, or pain less to be avoided than shame, or health less desirable than learning, or riches than nobility. Among her empty favors there is none that so pleases that silly humor in me which feeds upon it, as an authentic bull of Roman citizenship, which was granted to me lately when I was there, pompous in seals and gilt letters, and granted with all gracious liberality. And because these bulls are given in various styles, more or less favorable, and because before I had seen one, I would have been very glad to have been shown their formula, I will, to satisfy some person, if anyone is sick with the same curiosity as mine, transcribe it here in due form. On the report made to the Senate by Orazio Massimi, Marzo Ceccio Alessandro Muti, conservators of our fair city, concerning the right of Roman citizenship to be granted to the most illustrious Michel de Montaigne, Knight of the Order of St. Michael and Gentleman of the Chamber in Ordinary to the most Christian King, the Senate and people of Rome have decreed, considering that by ancient custom and practice those men have ever been adopted among us with ardor and eagerness, who, distinguished in virtue and nobility, have been greatly useful and ornamental to our republic, or might be so in the future, we, deeply moved by the example and authority of our ancestors, resolve that we should imitate and follow this noble custom. Wherefore, since the most illustrious Michel de Montaigne, Knight of the Order of St. Michael and Gentleman of the Chamber in Ordinary to the most Christian King, is most zealot for the Roman name, and by the honor and distinction of his family and his own virtuous merits, most worthy to be admitted to the Roman citizenship by the supreme judgment and will of the Senate and the people of Rome. It has pleased the Senate and people of Rome that the most illustrious Michel de Montaigne, adorned with all qualities and very dear to this noble people, should be inscribed as a Roman citizen, himself and his posterity, and invested with all the advantages and honors enjoyed by those who were born citizens and patricians of Rome, or who have been made such by the best of rights, wherein the Senate and people of Rome consider that they do not so much confer the rights of citizenship on him as a gift, as pay them as a debt, nor do him more benefit than they receive from him who, in accepting this citizenship, gives a singular ornament and honor to the city itself, which, Senatus Consultus, these conservations have caused to be transcribed by the secretaries of the Roman Senate and people and deposited in the archives of the Capitol, and have had this act drawn up and sealed with the common seal of the city in the year 2331, since the foundation of Rome, A.D. 1581, 13th of March. Being a citizen of no city, I am very pleased to be one of the noblest city that ever was or ever will be. If others examine themselves attentively as I do, they would find themselves as I do, full of inanity and nonsense. Get rid of it I cannot without getting rid of myself. We are all steeped in it, one as much as another, but those who are aware of it are a little better off, though I don't know. This common attitude and habit of looking elsewhere than at ourselves has been very useful for our own business. We are an object that fills us with discontent. We see nothing in us but misery and vanity. In order not to dishearten us, nature has very appropriately thrown the action of our vision outward. We go forward with the current, but to turn our course back toward ourselves is a painful movement. Thus the sea grows troubled and turbulent when it is tossed back on itself. Look, says everyone, at the movement of the heavens. Look at the public. Look at that man's quarrel, at this man's pulse, at another man's will. In short, always look high or low, or to one side, or in front, or behind you. It was a paradoxical command that was given us of old by that god at Delphi. Look into yourself, know yourself, keep to yourself. Bring back your mind and your will, which are spending themselves elsewhere, into themselves. You are running out. You are scattering yourself. Concentrate yourself. Resist yourself. You are being betrayed, dispersed, and stolen away from yourself. Do you not see that this world keeps its sight all concentrated inward and its eyes open to contemplate itself? It is always vanity for you, within and without, but it is less vanity when it is less extensive. Except for you, O man, said that God, each thing studies itself first, and according to its need has limits to its labors and desires. There is not a single thing as empty and needy as you, who embrace the universe. You are the investigator without knowledge, the magistrate without jurisdiction, and all in all, the fool of the farce.